Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. My name is Reed. Along with me, as always, is Mike. Mike, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing all right. I'm on my cell phone tonight because I need a new camera. So,
No worries. Glad we were able to find a way to get you on.
yeah.
Um, Wanted to kind of dive into a topic that comes up a lot. And we've seen comments and different people talking about this. And it's one of those things where the story has wildly shifted from, I think, probably 20 years ago. Everybody gave somebody credit, and then now it's kind of shifted to where people don't so much. And so what we're going to talk about is the origins of Marvel Comics, and whether or not Marvel is mostly the brainchild of Stan Lee, or is it Jack Kirby and Ditko? I think we see wild opinions on this. I think you see some who are completely in Stan's corner, who believe that he is the lovable grandfather who created all of these things. There are others who say he's basically like a con man who lied and took credit for all of Kirby and Ditko's work. And I think the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, but I thought we could just kind of have a conversation on it. And that one of the weird things we've seen in comics is we kind of saw with Batman, probably the most influential comic book character among them, where for years it was solely credited to Bob Kane. And as we found more and more out, that's kind of been rectified a little bit, where people have said, no, that was Bill Finger with Bob Kane. And that's something that you see now. Whereas, most of my childhood, when you saw Batman appears, Bob Kane created, or Batman created by Bob Kane. Right now, we've sort of seen that shift. So with Marvel, so many characters. Unlike, Batman or Superman, where it was one guy, even Wonder Woman was one guy, right? DC doesn't really have a Stan Lee figure or a Jack figure who created what we're talking X-Men, Hulk, Strange, Spider-Man, Daredevil, the Avengers, etc. And so, Mike, I'll kick it to you because you're a bit more of the comic historian. Marvel, do you believe it was mostly Stan? Do you believe it was mostly Jack? Do you believe it was a combination? Where do you stand on that whole debate and where it's at?
Well, you got to give Stan props for holding down the fort while Jack Kirby was away. I mean, I kind of look at it like that because without Stan, there's really no Marvel comics, and without Jack, there's really no Marvel comics. So you really had to have both of them converge, and be able to lump in, great talent like Steve Ditko at the beginning, and push their initiative forward. You can't have one without the other. They were both integral in making Marvel what it was. So, Stan was tired of comics and wanted to move on and do something else. But I think for a lot of us, through the 70s, when I was a kid, we really didn't know any better. And I always thought the writer of the story, came up with the concepts and handed it off to the artist. And that's really what happened in DC Comics, but not so for Marvel. Marvel was very much a collaborative effort. And if it weren't for all the right elements being there at the right time, and something very controversial that happened to Jack Kirby when he was at DC in the late 50s, that we will talk about at some other time.
Yeah.
But that incident, because you have to understand, Jack was mad at Marvel. Um, they had kind of screwed him over in the 40s. Him and Joe Simon, it pissed him off when they created Captain America, and they quit and they went on their own merry way, and did great things. But anyway, we come down to 1960, and a calibration of all this great talent was landed right there in Marvel Comics in 1960, and it was amazing. You couldn't have had the explosion of Marvel Comics without Jack Kirby. There's no doubt. and Steve Ditko, there's no doubt. But the thing about Marvel is that it was so collaborative, um, and somebody had to get the writing credit. And it was, it was a kind of, it was a Wild West kind of world back then in comic books. Artists got their page rate, things like artists challenging for script and that kind of thing didn't really come until the later 60s with Jim Steranko, who challenged that notion that he did both the story and the art, and the editor just edited. But for many years, Stan claimed both the writer's credit and the editor's credit, and um, and so but really these artists, if you don't know, were kind of left to their own devices to come up with these stories, create the characters the way they wanted to create. And Stan, I'm sure for the most part on many projects, just did spell check and narration, and that was all that was needed. And he said so in many times. He said, putting in the dialogue for Jack Kirby's pages was like filling in a crossword puzzle, because you could see what was going on, and he would just write the dialogue. So I do believe that most of the early stories from say 60, 59 to 65, 66, I do believe the artists mostly came up with the concepts for the stories. I know Steve Ditko has said as much, but it was a Wild West world. They had deadlines to meet, and they were doing incredible things. Like, Ditko was working on like 3 books a month. Jack was working on like 6 books a month.
6 or 7,
And
yeah.
I mean, somehow they hit those deadlines. Um, I do feel that there wasn't enough credit given to the creators early on. I feel like it's been rectified, but too little, too late. But in the interim, there's no doubt if it wasn't for Stan's passion and his bravado, the way he pushed Marvel Comics, the way he did through the 60s and into the 70s, these properties would not be where they are today. There's no doubt.
Yeah, I think it's one of those interesting things where there are debates in society where people take a side, right? Like again, we always bring up sports on here, right? The New England Patriots, right? There's that debate of was it more the quarterback Tom Brady or the coach Bill Belichick, right? The Chicago Bulls, there was always was it Michael Jordan or was it Scottie Pippen or was it Phil Jackson, right? Like who was responsible? And what's crazy is I think much like those sports teams, when the Patriots won their first of their 6 Super Bowls, nobody was wondering, is it more Brady or Belichick? Because they had no idea it was going to blow into this 20-year dynasty, right? And bloom
Right.
like that. So the first time it's, oh, everybody's great, everyone's amazing. And then as time goes on, it gets more, well, who should get the credit? And I think that's a lot of what it is with Marvel is you brought this up a lot. These guys had no idea in 1962 when they created Spider-Man that this would be something still going in 2025
There's
with
no way. There's no
multi-billion
way.
dollar films and action figures and kids running around in Spider-Man pajamas and all these different things that we have. They didn't think there'd be a Daredevil TV series and all these different things that have happened. And so I think some of it is it's obviously a collaborative process. Here's how I kind of see it if I had to assess. I think Kirby is the most responsible individual for the success of Marvel overall because I do believe while the writers are incredibly important, the visual approach and the art in comic books to me is what mostly sells the book, right? I think you can have a beautifully written comic book. If it's got stick figure drawings, it's just not going to reach the level. And I think the reason so many of Marvel characters took off was Jack's designs, Jack's way of drawing them, Jack's that signature, the way that Thor and Hulk and the
And
Fantastic Four
Steve
and Doom, and then
and
you throw
Ditko.
Steve in, right? And
Yeah.
then Steve's approach, and but here's where I'll have to give Stan credit, right? Stan, it seems, and I don't think there's much debate on this. He was the one who decided Ditko should draw Peter Parker and not Kirby. And so Stan can't get no credit because one of the big things is, as much as we want to give Jack Kirby a lot of credit, Jack Kirby has very little to do with the signature, iconic Marvel character in Spider-Man. Right? There's, I guess
Yeah.
he's the Amazing Fantasy 15 cover, I believe, is Jack. But
And Spider-Man #1, he did that one too.
so you have some, but right, the main character that takes off, not a
Yeah,
ton of Jack involvement.
right.
Um, I think the other part where Stan frequently kind of gets cut out by people, and some of this is because it's to his detriment and to his credit. Um, like you said, Stan's passion for comic books, the loving ambassador who goes out and sells these things to the masses has to be given credit, even if he's maybe not as responsible for what he's saying he's responsible for. And there's no question, the mascot of Marvel for a long time was Stan. Stan
Yeah.
was the one who went on TV, and
And
you could say he did that egotistically, but it worked. He established that brand,
and
and his personality got it.
he was very forward thinking into television and
Mhm.
movies way back in the early 70s, and really went out on a limb and pushed for this, underdog medium to go forward and, go to the, television and movies. He really envisioned that and pushed that forward. You got to give him a ton of credit. Um, you know, Maybe not as much as I did when I was a kid, thinking
Yeah,
he wrote every single script. But Marvel didn't work on scripts like DC did. DC was a production house where somebody got on a typewriter and typed up a script and then handed it to the artist who
true.
designed the pages. And it wasn't like that at Marvel. It was like, give me a Green Goblin Spider-Man story this week, and the
And Steve
artist,
goes and draws it. Yeah,
yeah, and Steve, did a lot of the story, and the same with Jack. They created out of whole cloth most of those stories, but if not for Stan guiding it this way and that way, and we'll never know how much guidance or how much editorial he had, but you got to know that, especially in the dialogue, we know that a lot of that was Stan and helped. They all helped the story move along, and it was just, it was just a magical moment in time when they all got together and shared their
right.
talents together to create this. And now they're billion-dollar properties. We're all arguing, well, Jack should have got more credit and Ditko should have got more credit. Of course they should have. And then Stan gobbled up all the credit. It was what it was at that moment in time, and they were a struggling industry trying to do better. And Stan had this other visionary, thought process to take it to higher levels, and he eventually made it happen.
I think that's one of the things is when we get into these debates sometimes about who's responsible and who gets more credit and stuff. A lot of it is perspective, and a lot of it is simply just what do you value. I think it's the same, and I think what you can look at with these guys, right? There was a magic mix when they were together. Outside of that, none of them were as successful without each other. Stan's creations post Steve and Jack don't hold up to what they
Yeah,
were with them. Jack, while he had a lot of success at DC in the 70s, with characters, the New Gods and Mr. Miracle and Commandi and the Forever People, while an important part of the DC tapestry, did not become Superman, Batman, the Hulk, etc. Right? Steve Ditko, a lot of cool Charlton characters he created, right? The Question and stuff like that didn't exactly take off the way Spider-Man did. And so it does seem there was a magical mix that was needed of them. The same way that when we get into these debates about, Tom Brady versus Bill Belichick, they're neither one of them was successful without each other. Right? Like they
that's
were
true.
somewhat successful. Like Brady won a Super Bowl without Belichick, but he didn't win six. He didn't win multiple ones. Like, and so I think that's the thing is sometimes we desire a clean answer when it's actually kind of muddied. I think the other part is there is a tendency to, I think, take shots at Stan because Stan very much seemingly took a lot of the credit. What I will give Stan again, there is, you and I have worked in the corporate world for a long time. There is something to the pitch man who gets the project bought by people.
Yeah.
And having that unified vision behind that guy is he's the great salesman. And for, Jack Kirby was not exactly the most showman esque personality. He was a different type of breed than Stan. Not
Yeah.
worse, not better or worse, just different type of person. Jack
Well,
wouldn't have really come up with the Excelsior and all the things that Stan did that kind of turned Marvel into this huge brand with a huge fan base that Stan really rallied and created a competition.
it's like in the corporate world with the different skill sets. When you get into a project, you know who's going to be the front man, and you know who's going to crunch the numbers and who's going to build the PowerPoint, because they excel in those areas, and that's the way it was in Marvel. Stan and Steve and Jack and everybody who worked back then, they all had these extraordinary skill sets, and when they came together, it was absolutely magic. And one of the last recorded conversations that I know of between Stan and Jack was on a radio show where they kind of had words a little bit together, but in the end, Stan recognized, and yeah, I think it was Mark Evanier who said, when they met up at a party shortly after that, um, Stan mentioned to Jack, I wish we could get together and do it one more time because it was magic. And they never did, unfortunately. But I think both of them realized that, there's a lot of finger pointing and name calling back and forth. And the fans are divided, between Jack and Stan, and that's unfortunate. But I think even in the end, Stan and Jack both realized that there was magic there, and when they worked together, it was amazing. And it was just different when they were working apart. It just was. They
Yeah,
complemented
it's
they complemented one another in a way that was unique and wonderful, and we're still enjoying the fruits of their work to this day, and that's amazing.
no that, and I think that the sheer amount of characters that were created in that decade
It's, it's
is
unbelievable.
insane, especially because really after those guys, if you just go Marvel, really the breakout characters outside of what Stan, Steve, and Jack created, Wolverine,
You could count on
Deadpool,
one hand.
the Punisher, you have three or four, some of Marvel's mutants, obviously, but not to the level of if you go on the stands and who still has a solo book. It's mainly the guys from that period outside of really Wolverine is probably the only creation post that has reached that level of you'd go, man, who are the five most popular Marvel characters? And it's not, he's probably
Yeah,
the only one not
yeah.
created by them. And it just
So
shows how
yeah,
it just shows up because I think that's the craziest thing is as a DC Comics guy, right? We don't really have this kind of debate with DC because it's so separated, right?
yeah,
There's one corner that created Batman and one corner that created Wonder Woman and one that created
yeah,
Superman and the Flash, and we have some guys who are more influential than others. But that period of time for those gentlemen, it's just hit after hit after hit, and I think the tragedy is sadly Jack, I think, is the undisputed king of comic books, right? If I had to say who's the man, who's the guy who should be
absolutely.
seen as the comics guy, should be Jack. But I will say what I have to give Stan credit for. How many people's entryway point to comics was just Stan Lee and his ability to just sound like your lovable grandfather or uncle or this really fun relative that you run to at Thanksgiving, and he tells such great stories. And he just, like you said, the passion that resonated off of Stan Lee for so many people works. And some people may not like that because they go, well, that's stolen, but there is something to that, right? Like if my wife doesn't know anything about comic books. She doesn't know what when Batman's not in an Avengers movie, she's like, what the heck is going on? Like, why is he not there? Right. And so like, but she sees Stan Lee and it's like, oh, that's the comic book guy. And so I
Yeah.
do think there is something to Stan's ability to be that guy for a really long time and sell the public on it. But it's probably a debate that will rage on forever with sides that are there. If I
Yeah.
had to say who's more responsible, I would probably go Jack slightly. But I do
Yeah.
think this effort to minimize Stan Lee, I just don't think I don't think it's accurate in that you can say Stan Lee stole a lot of credit, but man, is he involved in all of these things that hit. And so it's really hard. He's a common denominator in why a lot of these worked. And so it's really, with Daredevil's Bill Everett, Ditko is Spider-Man, right? And you can say those different gentlemen did different things, but Stan, no question, had some involvement in all of it. But I
Absolutely.
probably a debate that'll rage on forever. Let us know though. What do you guys think below? Do you think this is more of a Stan thing, a Steve thing, a Jack thing? Do you think one deserves the most credit, or do you believe it's just kind of a complicated mess and they all deserve some credit in there? Let us know as always what you think below. We'll never pretend to be the experts on this, and I guess it's one of those things that history will kind of just depends on your perspective on what you believe. As always, folks, thank you guys so much for watching. God bless you. We'll catch you in our next video.
Thanks, everybody.